It's a story about 13 years ago. I still don't know what that was. I wish I could forget it as soon as possible. At the time, I had just moved to Tokyo and did not know what was right or left. With a tattered map of Tokyo given to me by my grandfather, I wandered through a strange city. My reason for coming to Tokyo was to look for a job. At the time, I was out of work in a rural area and relied on distant relatives to come to me. My uncle told me, "I don't know about jobs, but I can offer you a place to live for cheap." The only time I talked to my uncle was over the phone, so I was completely uneasy. In hindsight, however, my feelings of uneasy at this time were correct. It was almost dark when I arrived at the apartment. A large old lady was standing at the entrance of the apartment. The large old lady said, "Welcome, welcome. You must be tired. Let me show you the apartment around." I entered the dimly lit apartment as I was led. Not only was the apartment building in a complicated location, but the building itself extended further back into the neighborhood, giving me a feeling of being oppressed. The weeds were growing freely. Actually, the sun was setting, but it even felt as if I was entering a dark cave. I was strangely afraid of a fly that had landed on my aunt's back before I knew it. I clutched my luggage and said in a loud voice, "Well, it's my first time in Tokyo, so there are a lot of people here." The old lady turned around and said, "Be quiet," yelled at me. Then I realized that the large old lady was an uncle dressed as a woman. I was disheartened at that moment, and I felt the terror of urban living. The room was well furnished, except for the fishy smell, and there was nothing to complain about. However, rent in Tokyo was as high as 90,000, no matter how much he was offering me a special price. There was one 6 tatami room and a kitchen with a mended floorboard. The water was always muddy. However, I was thankful that the toilet was a private room. However, the hole in the Japanese-style toilet smelled terrible due to the summer heat. Even with the lid on, I could still smell it. I can't stand it. My uncle's thick makeup glistened, and the smell of his disgusting makeup assaulted me, making me nauseous whenever I'm around him. Then the uncle who had removed his makeup came to visit again, this time as if nothing had happened, and greeted me. The uncle said to me as if nothing had happened, "Thank you for coming so far from home. I'm sorry I couldn't pick you up due to some business. A woman answered the door, didn't she? How was her?" I said. Stopping to think, I involuntarily uttered, "What?" The uncle asked, "Was she beautiful?" He asked again. This time he looked into my eyes. "Would you call it eyeliner?" My uncle's eye area still had makeup that had not been removed. I replied, "Nothing," in a choked voice to hide my upset. When I responded ambiguously and only with my mouth, the uncle was in a clearly bad mood. The smell of the room, my greasy sweat, and my uncle's makeup filled the 6 tatami-sized room, where there was no breeze. That night, I got into the dusty, rumpled futon that had been provided. Tired as I was, I forced myself to sleep. How much time has passed? There are multiple moving objects in a dark room. I don't know if I would call it a sign, a sound, or a rotten smell. Anyway, something is around my bedding. But I forced myself to meditate and sleep. I guess I was quite tired. Following day, I hit a few places to find a part-time job. However, I could not find it easily, so I ordered coffee at a coffee shop and felt small and lonely, frightened by the hustle and bustle of the city. Suddenly, my eyes fell on my wrist holding my coffee cup. Tooth marks? I had to look closely to notice it, but there were clearly teeth marks on the wrist. I assumed that I must have chewed it in my sleep. The coffee tasted bad with hands that had much smaller teeth marks than mine. Frankly, I wanted to leave. But the only place I can go back to is that apartment. Would I see that uncle who disguised himself as a lady again? With trepidation, I hobbled back to my room and locked the door. The stench in the room had subsided somewhat, but for some reason the smell of makeup was newly lingering in my room. That night, as I was sleeping under the covers with lots of slobber on me, I again felt some signs. I think it was a cat, but I was still frightened under the covers, sweating in the heat of a tropical night. But I couldn't take it anymore, so I pulled my hand out from under the covers in the darkness and waved it towards the black mass. I wanted to make sure it was all in my mind. But the back of my hand hit some cold object, which seemed to hit the wall with such force that it rolled onto the tatami mat. I felt a chill run down my spine at the sensation in my hands. It was the same feeling on my cheek that I used to get into fights and hit when I was younger. A black mass rolled around and stopped. Suddenly, I realized that it was a human head. And where am I? Suddenly, something screamed in a low, drowning voice. I seemed to have fainted when it screamed. When I awoke, the head had already disappeared. I was drenched in sweat, so I took off my shirt to wipe myself off. Then I was astonished. My entire body was covered in teeth marks. I did not do it myself in my sleep. The proof was in the teeth marks on my cheeks that almost bled. Moreover, the teeth marks varied from large to small. I screamed and tried to leave, but I did not forget to shave. Then, for a while, no cross-dressing uncle showed up, but I felt getting pushed further and further into a corner. In fact, at this time, I was acting strangely, even though I think about it now. The most important reason for this may be that I was still sleeping in that room. I had lost more than 10 pounds that had turned so pale my bystanders gave me the creeps. There was no work at all for me, probably because of this, and I would return home exhausted. The teeth marks remained on my entire body for a day, and one of the interviewers asked me, "Well, what are those marks?" I couldn't find a good excuse, so I said, "It looks like I've been bitten." And he laughed. I guess they thought my girlfriend, who doesn't actually exist, did it to me. For goodness sake, I was nearing my limits. I finally began to see illusions and even worse bandages all over my body to hide my teeth marks. Even then, I would walk outside and yell out to strangers, "Good morning," and so out in a loud voice. I think I was right on the verge of losing my mind. That night, I found a piece of paper, a nutrition drink in my room with a note from my uncle saying it was a gift. I was tired, so I gulped it down without hesitation. And I seemed to have fallen into a deeper sleep than usual. That probably helped me wake up in the middle of the night with a clear head. Then, I finally realized that the fact that there were a dozen or so black blobs clinging to my body, biting me, was an anomaly. I knew I didn't have time to be afraid. When I got up from the futon, I felt a black mass creeping in the dark room, rolling across the tatami mat and disappearing into the kitchen. I said, "Wait," and went to the kitchen. Then I felt as if those shadows had somehow escaped into the bathroom, so I ran to the toilet. The toilet was Japanese style, but it was dark inside. I tried to turn on the light, but it wouldn't work, so I turned over a packing box and grabbed a flashlight. Then I laughed and pointed the flashlight into the toilet. Filth illuminated in the darkness. When I looked closely at the bottom of the Japanese-style toilet, I can see maggots crawling around. And among them were many rotting heads and skeletonized heads that looked up at me blankly, covered in my poops and peas. I screamed and for some reason picked up my cap and ran out with a kick at a door in my underwear.
Ow! Ow!
It seemed that someone was behind the door. When I turned around, I saw my uncle dressed as a woman lying on the ground with a master key and a saw. My uncle yelled at me, "Don't open it out of the blue." I became irrationally angry and threw more and more stones nearby.
Ow!
The uncle screamed and cowered. At some point, I realized that the stone I was throwing was a human head. Those were biting my uncle more and more. The uncle kept screaming. His flesh seemed to be bitten off. I got scared and ran out of the apartment. I had not been in touch with my uncle since then and have not heard from him. I hope that head is a ghost. 13 years had passed since then, and although it is now a distant memory, the single tooth mark that remains on my neck did not disappear for some time. It may have been a bite mark from a fresh head I had hit.